The October rain of 1873 fell upon Paris with the persistence of a creditor, and Antoine Moreau watched it streak down the grimy window of his workshop while adjusting the delicate brass fittings of his newest magic lantern. At 38 years, his hands moved with the unconscious precision that comes from 2 decades of practice. Though lately, the narrator must confess, those same hands trembled slightly when handling the particular glass slides his late wife had once painted with such care. The workshop on Rue des Petits Carreaux occupied the ground floor of a narrow building squeezed between a bakery and a shop selling funeral wreaths. Life and death keeping him company, as Antoine often mused. The space smelled perpetually of whale oil, brass polish, and the faint chemical tang of photographic compounds. Shelves lined every wall, cluttered with boxes of glass slides depicting everything from biblical scenes to the wonders of modern engineering. The Eiffel Tower would not exist for another 16 years, yet Paris was already transforming itself, rising from the ashes of the Commune with the determined optimism of a city that refused to acknowledge its scars. "Master Moreau," called Lucien from the back room, "the limelight's giving trouble again." The apprentice appeared in the doorway, his young face smudged with soot. 26 years old and ambitious as a ministerial secretary, Lucien Dubois possessed talent but lacked the patience that transforms craft into art. Antoine set down his tools with the careful deliberation of a man who'd learned that haste ruins more than time saves. "Show me," he said simply, though his thoughts ran deeper. "The boy wants to run before he can walk properly, just as I once did." Strange how age makes philosophers of us all, even simple lanternists. The limelight apparatus stood like a small iron monument to human ingenuity, its cylinder of quicklime waiting to be heated to incandescence. Together, they worked in comfortable silence, master and apprentice, adjusting the hydrogen and oxygen feeds until the light blazed white and steady. This was Antoine's true religion, the transformation of chemicals and flame into wonder, the projection of dreams onto blank walls for audiences hungry for escape. The afternoon wore on with the rhythmic sounds of work, the soft hiss of gas flames, the gentle clink of glass slides being cleaned, the scratch of Antoine's pen as he updated his ledger. He charged 15 francs for an evening's entertainment at a bourgeois home, 25 if they wanted the chromatrope with its hypnotic swirling colors. Not a fortune, but enough to keep the workshop running and food on his table. It was nearly 5 o'clock when the knock came, not the timid tap of a potential customer, nor the familiar rhythm of Father Guillaume arriving for their weekly chess match, but the assertive rap of someone accustomed to having doors opened promptly. Antoine wiped his hands on his leather apron and answered. The man standing in the rain wore the kind of black wool coat that cost more than Antoine earned in 3 months. Water beaded on its surface without seeming to penetrate, as if even the elements recognized quality and kept a respectful distance. "Monsieur Moreau? I am Henri Vance, secretary to Monsieur Edouard Beaumont." Antoine knew the name, of course. Beaumont owned 3 textile factories and a mansion in the 16th arrondissement, the kind of man whose morning coffee cost more than a worker's daily wage. "How may I assist you?" Antoine asked, maintaining the careful neutrality he'd perfected for dealing with the wealthy. Vance produced an envelope from his coat with the flourish of a magician, though Antoine knew real magic required more preparation and considerably more equipment. Monsieur Beaumont requests your services for an entertainment on October 31st, a gathering of close friends and family. He has heard excellent reports of your projection exhibitions. Halloween night, Antoine thought, when the bourgeoisie play at being frightened, while real terrors walk the streets in the form of poverty and disease. But 15 francs was 15 francs. I would be honored, he replied. The secretary handed over the envelope. The details are within. Good evening, monsieur. After Vance departed, leaving only wet footprints and the lingering scent of expensive pomade, Antoine opened the envelope. Inside, along with the formal invitation inscribed on paper thick as cardboard, were 2 10-franc notes, an advance that spoke of either generosity or the expectation of something beyond ordinary entertainment. 20 francs in advance? Lucien whistled appreciatively, having materialized at Antoine's shoulder with the stealth young men perfect when money appears. They must want the full exhibition, dissolving views, chromotropes, perhaps even the Phantasmagoria show? Antoine folded the invitation thoughtfully. Something felt different about this commission, though he couldn't name what exactly. Perhaps it was the date. Halloween carried certain expectations, or perhaps it was simply that the wealthy rarely paid in advance without expecting something extraordinary in return. Begin preparing the ghost slides, he told Lucien, the ones with the skeletons and phantoms, but also pack the pastoral scenes and the comic slides. We'll see what mood strikes them. That evening, Antoine climbed the narrow stairs to his apartment above the workshop, his knees protesting each step with the insistence of age beginning to make itself known. The rooms were Spartan, but clean. He'd maintained the tidiness his wife had insisted upon, though now it felt more like habit than home. He prepared his simple supper of bread, cheese, and wine, while the rain continued its percussion against the windows. Later, sitting in his single comfortable chair with a book of optical theory open but unread on his lap, Antoine found himself studying the invitation again. The Beaumont address was familiar, not because he'd been there, but because he'd read about the family in the newspapers. Their daughter had drowned in the Seine last June, a tragedy that had occupied the gossip of Paris for weeks. 11 years old, her name had been Celeste, yes. A fall from a bridge during a family outing. The body recovered 3 days later. The narrator must observe that Antoine understood grief intimately. It had been his companion these 3 years since consumption claimed Marguerite. But his grief was private, contained, like a lantern slide kept in a dark box. The wealthy, he'd observed, often made their mourning a public performance, as elaborate as any magic lantern show. He prepared for bed methodically, checking that the workshop was locked, the gas flames extinguished, the valuable slides secured. Tomorrow he would visit Father Guillaume for their chess match, and perhaps ask his opinion about the Beaumont Commission. The old priest had a way of seeing through the shadows that people cast, distinguishing real from projection. As sleep approached, Antoine thought about the nature of his craft. He created illusions that everyone knew were false, yet they brought joy, wonder, sometimes even comfort. The shadows dancing on the wall were honest in their deception. No one left his exhibitions believing they'd seen reality. But lately, especially since Marguerite's death, he'd noticed how desperately people wanted to believe in something beyond the mechanical movement of glass and light. The rain had stopped, leaving only the drip of water from the eaves and the distant sound of a drunk singing off-key. October 31st was still 3 weeks away. Plenty of time to prepare whatever entertainment the Beaumonts required. Yet something, call it intuition, or simply the wisdom that comes from years of reading audiences, told Antoine this would not be an ordinary exhibition. We all cast shadows, he thought, as sleep finally claimed him. But some shadows are longer and darker than others. The Beaumont mansion rose from the Parisian street like a monument to textile profits, its limestone facade glowing amber in the gaslight of October 31st. Antoine stood at the servants' entrance with his equipment cases, watching his breath fog in the cold air while Lucien struggled with the heavier box containing the limelight apparatus. The narrator notes with some irony that they'd entered through the same door as the coal delivery. Illumination and fuel granted equal status in the social hierarchy. A housemaid answered their knock, young and sharp-eyed, despite her deferential manner. "You're the lantern man. I'm Marie Claire. Follow me and mind the Persian runner. Madame would have apoplexy if it's marked." They followed her through a maze of narrow servants' corridors that ran parallel to the grand rooms like veins beneath skin. Through thin walls, Antoine heard the murmur of gathered voices, the clink of crystal, the practiced laughter of people performing sociability. "Many guests tonight?" he asked casually. Marie Claire glanced back with an expression he couldn't quite read. 12, not counting Madame Petrova. She's separate. Before Antoine could pursue this curious distinction, they emerged into a music room that had been transformed for the evening. Heavy black drapes covered the windows, and the furniture had been arranged in a circle around a single round table. Not the typical setup for a magic lantern exhibition, which required rows of chairs facing a blank wall. Antoine's disquiet, already simmering, began to boil. "There must be some mistake," he said carefully. "This arrangement isn't suitable for projections." "Oh, you're not the primary entertainment," came a voice from the doorway. Madame Beaumont entered, 45 years old, still beautiful but worn down like a cameo rubbed too often. Her black mourning dress absorbed light rather than reflecting it. "You're here to assist Madame Petrova with her demonstration." Antoine felt Lucien tense beside him. "We're props," he thought with bitter amusement. "No different from our own lanterns." But 20 francs was 20 francs, and the wealthy had bought stranger things. "What would Madame require of us?" "Simply your equipment and expertise. Madame Petrova will explain." She drifted away like smoke, leaving only the scent of laudanum-laced perfume. They waited in the music room, Antoine examining the space with professional interest, while Lucien fidgeted with the latches on the equipment cases. The table at the room's center was polished mahogany, its surface reflecting the single gas jet left burning. 13 chairs surrounded it, an unfortunate number that surely hadn't escaped whoever arranged this gathering. "Monsieur Moreau?" The voice carried a slight accent, Russian perhaps, or something pretending to be Russian. Madame Petrova stood in the doorway like an actress awaiting her cue. She wore flowing purple robes that belonged more to opera than reality, and her dark hair was arranged in an elaborate construction that defied both gravity and taste. Perhaps 40 years old, though theatrical makeup made such calculations approximate. She glided forward, there was no other word for that studied movement, and extended a hand heavy with rings. "I understand you are masterful with light and shadow." "I operate projection equipment, madame. Nothing more mystical than that." Her laugh tinkled like broken glass. "But tonight, we shall make the mystical quite real." "You've heard of the Beaumont's tragedy?" Antoine nodded carefully. He'd learned long ago that information was currency, spent foolishly when given too freely. "Poor Celeste wishes to communicate with her parents. I am merely the conduit. But spirits sometimes require assistance in manifesting visually." She gestured toward his equipment. "Your lanterns will help focus the ethereal energies." Ah, thought Antoine, now we reach the heart of it. He was being asked to provide effects for a séance to help deceive grieving parents. His first instinct was refusal, but Lucien touched his arm, a reminder of their financial situation, the rent due, the supplies needed. "I'll need specific instructions," Antoine said neutrally. Madame Petrova smiled like a cat who'd spotted an unguarded cream pot. "Simply project a soft light on that wall when I give the signal, a single cough, nothing more. The spirits will do the rest." The guests began arriving at 9 o'clock. Antoine and Lucien positioned themselves in the corner with their equipment, trying to become invisible. Not difficult for working men in a room full of people determined not to see them. He recognized some faces from newspaper illustrations: a deputy mayor, a prominent banker, the wife of an arms manufacturer. All wore expressions of studied skepticism, battling desperate hope. Monsieur Beaumont entered last, a man aged beyond his 52 years. Grief had carved lines in his face like erosion marks on limestone. He took his seat beside his wife, gripping her hand with the intensity of a drowning man clutching driftwood. Madame Petrova commanded the room's attention with practiced ease. "We gather tonight to pierce the veil between worlds," she intoned, her accent thickening dramatically. "I must warn you, the spirits are capricious. They may choose to manifest, or they may remain silent. We must approach with open hearts and minds." The gas jets were extinguished one by one until only candles provided illumination. In the dimness, Antoine noticed something curious: a faint sheen on one section of the wall, barely visible, like oil on water. His professional interest sharpened. He knew that effect, had seen it in photographs of certain chemical compounds exposed to light. "Join hands," Madame Petrova commanded. "Close your eyes and think of dear Celeste." The room fell silent except for Madame Beaumont's suppressed sobs. Antoine watched the medium carefully. She began to sway, moaning softly, building the theatrical tension with expert timing. "She comes, she comes. Celeste, sweet child, speak to us." A cough, the signal. Antoine activated his lantern, projecting a dim circle of light on the wall. But something else appeared within that circle, something that made the assembled guests gasp. The faint image of a young girl materialized on the wall, translucent and wavering, dressed in white. "Mama!" someone shrieked, Madame Beaumont rising from her chair. But Antoine's trained eye caught what others missed in their emotional turmoil. The image wasn't moving, not truly. It glowed with a greenish phosphorescence independent of his projection. And there, just for a moment, he detected the distinct odor of camphor mixed with something else. Sulfur compounds, perhaps? The image lasted perhaps 30 seconds before fading, leaving the guests in uproar. Some wept, others prayed, and Monsieur Beaumont stared at the wall as if willing his daughter to return. Madame Petrova collapsed dramatically in her chair, claiming exhaustion from channeling such powerful energies. As Antoine and Lucien packed their equipment afterward, accepting their payment from a butler who handled the money as if it were contaminated, the young apprentice whispered, "Did you see it?" "The girl? I saw an image," Antoine replied carefully. "Nothing more, nothing less." But his mind was working furiously. Phosphorescent paint, that's what created the glow. Applied to the wall in advance through a stencil, nearly invisible until activated. The brief flash of magnesium powder Madame Petrova had concealed in her sleeve. He'd glimpsed it when she raised her arms, would charge the phosphorescent particles, making them glow in the darkness. The camphor served as a suspension medium, keeping the paint stable until needed. They loaded their equipment into a hired cart, the night air sharp after the close atmosphere of the séance room. As they rattled through the streets of Paris, Lucien remained unusually quiet, until finally bursting out, "It was trickery, wasn't it? The whole thing." "The projection of light requires technique," Antoine said carefully. "The projection of hope requires something else entirely." Marie-Claire appeared at the servants' entrance as they prepared to leave, ostensibly to ensure they'd collected all their equipment. But she leaned close to Antoine, pressing something into his hand, a calling card. "My mistress doesn't know I'm giving you this. She's too deep in grief to see clearly. But someone should know that Madame Petrova visited the house 3 days ago alone, to prepare the room spiritually. She was left unattended for an hour." Antoine pocketed the card, noting the address written on the back in a different hand. "You have suspicions?" "I have eyes," she said simply, then disappeared back into the house. As their cart rolled through the gaslit streets toward home, Antoine reflected that he'd been hired to provide illumination and had done so, though perhaps not in the way anyone had intended. The real question now was whether to leave the Beaumonts in their comforting delusion or reveal the mechanical nature of their miracle. Truth was its own kind of light, but sometimes darkness served a purpose too. Every projection, he thought, requires both light and shadow to create the complete image. November arrived with frost on the workshop windows, and Antoine found himself staring at the address Marie-Claire had provided, while his morning coffee grew cold. The card led to a chemical supply shop near the Sorbonne, the kind of establishment that served both legitimate scientists and those whose experiments ventured into murkier territories. 3 days had passed since the séance, 3 days of Antoine trying to convince himself that the Beaumont's delusions weren't his responsibility. "Master, you've been distracted all morning," Lucien observed, entering with a box of new glass slides that needed sorting. The apprentice had developed dark circles under his eyes lately, and Antoine wondered if the boy was taking on extra work he didn't know about. Antoine set down the card decisively. "I need to visit Fourier's chemical supply. Watch the shop, and if the widow Martigny comes for her slides of the Holy Land, tell her they'll be ready tomorrow." The walk to the Latin Quarter took him through streets still bearing scars from the Commune. Bullet holes in walls like pockmarks, new buildings rising beside blackened ruins. The narrator observes that Paris in 1873 was a city simultaneously forgetting and remembering, much like Antoine himself. Fourier's establishment occupied a narrow shopfront squeezed between a bookbinder and a café, where medical students debated loudly over cheap wine. The interior smelled of sulfur, alcohol, and that peculiar metallic tang that haunts places where elements are transformed. Shelves reached to the ceiling, lined with brown bottles bearing Latin labels that promised transformation, preservation, or destruction, depending on the user's intent. "Phosphorescent compounds," Antoine said to the elderly proprietor, whose wire spectacles reflected the light like an insect's eyes. "Specifically, calcium sulfide or barium sulfide preparations. Who's been purchasing them recently?" Fourier regarded him with the suspicion shopkeepers reserve for unusual questions. "That's not information I typically share, monsieur." "Moreau, I operate projection equipment, magic lanterns. I'm researching new effects for my exhibitions." Not entirely a lie. The narrator notes that the best deceptions contain seeds of truth. The old man's expression softened slightly. "Ah, a fellow seeker of luminescence. Yes, those compounds create quite striking effects when properly activated. I had a young man here just last week buying calcium sulfide powder. Said he worked for a theatrical company." Antoine's pulse quickened. "Can you describe him?" 25, perhaps. Dark hair, nervous manner. Kept checking his pocket watch as if late for an appointment. Paid in advance for a substantial quantity, nearly 50 grams. That amount would cover several walls with phosphorescent paint, enough for multiple seances. Did he give a name? Dupont or Dubois? Something common. Wait. Fourier consulted a ledger thick as a Bible. Here, L. Dubois, delivered to Rue des Petits Carreaux, number 47. Antoine's blood chilled. That was his workshop address. His own apprentice had been purchasing the very chemicals used in Madame Petrova's deception. The betrayal stung worse than winter wind. He thanked Fourier and left, his mind racing through possibilities. Had Lucienne been recruited by Petrova? Was this why the boy had been so insistent they take the Beaumont commission? The 20-franc advance suddenly seemed less like generosity and more like a bribe. Instead of returning immediately to the workshop, Antoine visited Father Guillaume at the small church of Sainte-Marie. The priest was tending to candles in the chapel, his movements deliberate despite his 61 years. "You look troubled, my friend," he said without turning around. "This isn't our usual day for chess." "I need counsel, Father, about truth and deception, about whether revealing a lie that brings comfort is kindness or cruelty." Father Guillaume finally faced him, his weathered face creased with interest. "Ah, now we approach philosophy. Come, let's sit." They settled in a pew worn smooth by generations of faithful and faithless alike. Antoine explained the séance, the phosphorescent paint, his suspicions about Lucienne, though he kept names vague. The seal of confession wasn't his to claim, but discretion was. "The dead child is real," the priest said finally. "The parents' grief is real. The comfort they derive from believing she's contacted them, is that not real as well? But it's built on lies, on chemical tricks any competent chemist could replicate. And what of my communion wine? It's pressed from grapes, fermented by yeast, yet believers taste the blood of Christ. Should I explain the chemistry to them?" Antoine shifted uncomfortably. "That's different. Faith is what? More legitimate than a mother's need to believe her child isn't simply gone?" Father Guillaume's eyes held no judgment, only gentle inquiry. "I'm not saying this medium is right. Profiting from grief is its own sin. But perhaps your apprentice had reasons you haven't considered." Walking back to his workshop, Antoine noticed how the November light fell differently than October's, sharper, less forgiving. He found Lucien adjusting the limelight apparatus, whistling tunelessly. The boy startled when Antoine entered. "We need to discuss calcium sulfide," Antoine said simply. The color drained from Lucien's face like water from a broken vessel. "I can explain," "Then do so." Lucien set down his tools with shaking hands. "She came here, the Russian woman, 2 weeks before the Beaumont invitation. Said she needed someone who understood projection, someone discreet. Offered me 30 francs to purchase chemicals and say nothing." "And you agreed?" "My mother is ill," the words burst out like steam from a pressure valve. "The medicine she needs costs more than I earn in a month. What was I supposed to do?" Antoine felt his anger deflating, replaced by something more complex. The narrator observes that moral certainty becomes luxury when survival is at stake. "What else did she ask of you?" "Nothing, I swear. Just to buy the chemicals and keep quiet. I didn't know what she planned until the séance." Lucien's eyes pleaded for understanding. "I wanted to tell you, but she said if I spoke, she'd claim I was her accomplice, that we ran the scheme together. Who would believe an apprentice over a woman the Beaumonts invited into their home?" The truth of this was undeniable. The law favored the wealthy, and scandal attached itself to the poor like smoke to clothing. Antoine studied his apprentice, really looked at him for perhaps the first time. Not just eager and ambitious, but desperate, caught between duty to his mother and loyalty to his master. "Show me the receipt," Antoine said finally. Lucien produced it from his jacket, wrinkled from worried handling. The amount, the date, the chemical composition, all confirmed what Fourier had said. But something else caught Antoine's eye. The paper had been torn from a larger sheet, and on the reverse, barely visible, was part of a letterhead. "Ova Spiritual Services, testimonials available." "She runs a business," Antoine said slowly. "This isn't her first séance. Master, what will you do?" Antoine folded the receipt carefully. "First, I'll think. Then, perhaps, I'll project some light where others prefer shadow. But Lucien," he fixed the boy with a stern gaze, "no more secrets between us. Your mother's medicine, we'll find a way to manage it honestly." That evening, Antoine sat in his apartment with his books of chemistry and optics, but his thoughts wandered to the nature of deception. Every projection he created was essentially a lie, flat images pretending to have depth, still pictures suggesting movement. Yet his audiences knew they were watching illusions. They chose to suspend disbelief. But the Beaumonts hadn't chosen. They'd been manipulated in their most vulnerable moment, their grief exploited for profit. And somewhere in Paris, Madame Petrova was likely planning her next performance, her next extraction of sorrow and francs. Light reveals, he thought, but sometimes what it reveals makes us long for darkness. The camphor smell from the séance still lingered in his memory, mixing with the perpetual odor of his workshop chemicals. Tomorrow, he would need to make a decision. Remain a silent observer, or become an active participant in this shadow play. Either choice carried consequences, ripples that would spread like light through a prism, splitting white certainty into a spectrum of moral ambiguity. Outside, November wind rattled the windows, and Antoine pulled his jacket closer, though the cold he felt came from within rather than without. The reading room at the Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève was filled with the hushed rustling of pages and occasional coughs that echoed under the iron-ribbed ceiling. Antoine sat surrounded by newspapers from the past year, tracking Madame Petrova's appearances through the society pages like a hunter following spoor. November 4th had brought unseasonable warmth to Paris, and dust motes danced in the afternoon light streaming through tall windows. The pattern emerged slowly but undeniably. First mention in Brussels, January 1873. A séance at the home of a banking family who'd lost their son in the Franco-Prussian War. Then Amsterdam in March. Berlin in May, each time attending to families of means who'd suffered recent losses. The narrator notes that grief, like gold, attracts those who would mine it. Finding anything interesting? The voice startled him. Marie Claire stood beside his table, dressed in her day clothes rather than servant's attire, looking younger and somehow more substantial outside the Beaumont mansion's shadows. Antoine gestured to an empty chair. "How did you know I'd be here?" "Your apprentice told me. The nervous one, who looks like he hasn't slept properly in weeks." She settled across from him with the easy grace of someone comfortable in their own skin. "I came because there's something else you should know. Madame Petrova has convinced my employers to hold another séance, November 8th. 4 days away." Antoine rubbed his tired eyes. "And they're willing? After just one encounter? Willing?" Marie Claire laughed bitterly. "They're desperate for it. Madame Beaumont speaks of nothing else. She's convinced Celeste is trying to communicate something important." She paused, then added quietly, "My younger sister drowned too, 3 years ago, in the same river even. But we couldn't afford mediums or séances. We just had grief." The weight of this confession settled between them. Antoine studied her face, 19 years old, but aged by experience. Green eyes that missed nothing, hands calloused from work, but graceful in their movements. "Why help me expose this?" "Because false hope is worse than honest despair. At least with despair, you can begin to heal." She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "I copied this from Madame Petrova's correspondence. She was careless, left it on a hall table." The letter, written in English, was from someone identified only as M.R. in London, praising Petrova's success rate and mentioning a new phosphorescent compound that glows blue rather than green, more ethereal, better for child spirits. The casual discussion of deception as mere technical improvement turned Antoine's stomach. "She has a network," he said slowly. "This isn't just one woman's scheme. There's more. Inspector Fouché has been asking questions about her. Apparently, a family in Berlin filed a complaint after discovering the truth, but Petrova left before authorities could act." Antoine knew Fouché by reputation, a methodical investigator who treated spiritualist fraud as seriously as pocket-picking, which is to say, not very. But if formal complaints existed, that changed matters. They left the library together, walking through streets where merchants hawked late vegetables, and newspapers boys shouted headlines about colonial troubles in Indochina. Marie Claire moved through the crowd with practiced ease, neither pushing nor yielding, finding the rhythm of the city's flow. "I need to see this Inspector Fouché," Antoine said as they paused at an intersection. "He drinks at Café de la Paix every evening at 6, creature of habit, like most police." She adjusted her shawl against the cooling air. "But be careful. Madame Petrova has friends, or at least people she pays to be friendly." That evening, Antoine found Inspector Fouché exactly where Marie Claire had indicated, nursing a brandy and reading case files at a corner table. 44 years old, with the kind of mustache that required daily maintenance and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything, he looked up as Antoine approached. "Inspector, I'm Antoine Moreau. I have information about Madame Petrova." Fouché's expression didn't change, but he gestured to the opposite chair. "The lanternist from the Beaumont séance, yes. I know who you are. I make it my business to know who attends these performances." Antoine explained his observations, the phosphorescent paint, the chemical purchases, though he protected Lucien's name, saying only that he'd traced the materials. Fouché listened without interrupting, occasionally sipping his brandy. "You have proof?" the inspector asked finally. "I have knowledge of how it's done, and I could demonstrate the technique, reproduce the effect exactly." "Ah, but that proves only that it could be done through trickery, not that it was. The believers would say you're simply replicating divine manifestation through mundane means." Fouché's smile was weary. "I've been investigating spiritualist frauds for 3 years, monsieur. The victims rarely thank you for revealing the truth, but if she's defrauding people, is she? They pay for comfort and receive it. She provides a service they desperately want. Unless someone files a formal complaint, or unless I can catch her in the act of explicitly criminal behavior, my hands are tied." He pulled a card from his pocket. "However, if you observe anything more concrete, contact me immediately." Walking home through gaslit streets, Antoine felt the weight of futility settling on his shoulders. The law wouldn't help unless the Beaumonts wanted it to, and they were racing toward deeper delusion, not clarity. As he passed a church, bells tolled 8 o'clock, and he thought of Father Guillaume's words about the nature of truth and comfort. His workshop was dark when he arrived, Lucien having left for the evening. But something was wrong. The door, which he always locked with 2 separate keys, stood slightly ajar. Antoine entered cautiously, lighting a lamp near the entrance. The vandalism was thorough but selective. His projection equipment remained untouched, but his personal papers had been ransacked, his correspondence scattered, his ledgers torn. On his workbench, someone had left a note written in purple ink. "Some shadows should not be illuminated. Consider your apprentice's mother." A threat, then. Not subtle, but effective. Antoine's hands shook slightly as he began gathering the scattered papers. They knew about Lucien's vulnerability, about the leverage they held. The narrator observes that conscience becomes a luxury when others depend on our choices. He spent the next hour restoring order, his mind working through possibilities. Madame Petrova had revealed herself as more than a simple fraudster. She was part of something organized, something with reach and resources. But Antoine had spent 20 years creating illusions, understanding how misdirection worked. If she wanted to play with shadows and light, she'd chosen the wrong opponent. From a locked drawer in his desk, one they hadn't found, he retrieved his most precious possession. A set of glass slides Marguerite had painted in her final months, when her hands could barely hold the brush. Scenes of impossible beauty, gardens that never existed, cities of pure light, abstract patterns that seemed to move even when still. He'd never projected them for an audience, keeping them private, like grief itself. But now, studying them in the lamplight, an idea began to form. If Madame Petrova wanted to create false spirits, perhaps it was time someone showed the Beaumonts what real artistry looked like. Honest illusion that announced itself as such. Beauty that didn't require deception to inspire wonder. Every projection requires a screen, he thought, carefully replacing the slides. But sometimes the screen itself becomes the performance. The November night had grown cold, and somewhere in Paris, Madame Petrova was likely planning her next manifestation, confident in her threats and her network. But Antoine had something she didn't expect. The knowledge that sometimes the best way to fight a lie wasn't with truth, but with a better, more honest form of illusion. November 8th arrived wrapped in fog thick as wool, and Antoine stood in his workshop examining the equipment he'd prepared for the evening séance. Lucien watched nervously from the doorway, having barely spoken since learning about the threatening note. The boy's mother had taken a turn for the worse, adding urgency to their financial predicament that made every decision feel like a balance on a knife's edge. "You're really going back there?" Lucien asked finally. "After the warning?" Antoine adjusted the special slide holder he'd constructed over the past 3 days, a mechanism that could switch between multiple glass plates silently, invisibly. "They expect me to provide the same dim projection. That's exactly what they'll get. Nothing more, nothing less." But both knew this wasn't entirely true. Hidden among his standard equipment were new additions: a small vial of ammonia solution, strips of treated paper that would react to phosphorus compounds, and most importantly, a miniature camera obscura modified to capture images in near darkness. His own invention, untested, but theoretically sound. Marie-Claire had sent word that afternoon through a street child. The séance would include more guests this time, including a journalist from Le Figaro whose own son had died of typhoid. The stakes had risen. Public exposure would spread Madame Petrova's influence beyond the Beaumonts' private grief into the broader current of Parisian society. At 6 o'clock, Antoine and Lucien loaded their equipment onto a hired cart. The streets were treacherous with fog, gaslight creating yellow halos that revealed nothing beyond arm's reach. The narrator observes that such weather seemed appropriate for an evening devoted to obscuring truth rather than revealing it. The Beaumont mansion blazed with light despite the fog, every window illuminated as if brightness could banish sorrow. Marie-Claire met them at the servants' entrance, her face drawn with worry. "She's brought assistants this time. 2 men who claim to be researchers in psychic phenomena. They've been examining the room all afternoon." Antoine's pulse quickened. Additional accomplices meant a more elaborate deception planned. What kind of examinations? Measuring distances? Checking walls for density? They claim it's to ensure optimal spiritual conductivity. Her voice carried barely concealed disgust. "They've also insisted on searching anyone who enters, to prevent skeptics from bringing disruptive influences." The search was perfunctory, but troubling. One of Petrova's associates, a thin man with predatory eyes, patted down both Antoine and Lucien before allowing them entry. He missed the vial of ammonia, concealed in a hollow lens cap, and the treated papers sewn into Antoine's jacket lining. The narrator notes that those who look for obvious threats often miss subtle preparations. The music room had been further transformed. Black curtains now covered not just windows but walls, creating a cave-like atmosphere. The round table remained, but new additions included what Petrova called spirit batteries, glass jars filled with copper and zinc plates in acidic solution, supposedly to energize the ethereal plane. Antoine recognized them as simple galvanic cells, producing weak electrical current. More guests had indeed gathered, 15 this time, including the journalist, a thin man who watched everything with professional skepticism. Monsieur Beaumont looked worse than before, as if grief were physically consuming him. His wife clung to his arm, her eyes bright with laudanum and desperate hope. Madame Petrova entered with theatrical grandeur, her purple robes now supplemented with a chain of strange symbols that might have been Russian or simply decorative nonsense. "Tonight," she announced, "we attempt something more ambitious. Celeste has been trying to communicate a message. With your faith and these scientific instruments," she gestured to the batteries, "we shall give her voice." Antoine positioned his equipment as before, but this time he carefully noted every detail. The wall where the previous image had appeared showed no visible trace of phosphorescent paint, yet when he brushed against it while adjusting his lantern, his fingers came away with an almost imperceptible oily residue. Fresh application, then. "Before we begin," Petrova continued, "my associates will ensure the room's spiritual integrity." The two men made a great show of waving various instruments, modified compasses mostly, declaring the space properly prepared. During their performance, Antoine noticed one of them pause near his equipment, though nothing seemed disturbed. The séance began as before, joined hands, extinguished lights, Petrova's dramatic invocations. But this time, when she coughed, the signal, Antoine activated not just his standard projection, but his hidden camera obscura, its lens aimed at the wall where he knew the image would appear. The manifestation was more elaborate than before. Celeste's image appeared as expected, glowing with phosphorescent light. But now it seemed to move slightly, the face turning as if looking at specific people. Several guests cried out, and Madame Beaumont fainted entirely, requiring smelling salts. But Antoine had caught something crucial through his camera obscura, a second projection, incredibly faint, coming from one of the spirit batteries. The thin man had modified it into a simple projection device, using the electrical current to heat a small lime light. The moving image wasn't painted on the wall but projected over it, creating the illusion of animation. "She speaks!" Petrova cried out, and indeed a voice seemed to emerge from nowhere, thin, childlike, saying, "Maman, Papa, je suis heureuse. I am happy." Antoine recognized the technique immediately, a speaking tube hidden in the curtains, probably leading to an adjacent room where someone, likely a child hired for a few francs, spoke the words. The acoustic properties of the fabric-draped room made locating the source nearly impossible. The séance continued for 30 minutes, each manifestation more elaborate than the last. At one point, a white shape seemed to float across the room. Fishing line and gauze, Antoine noted, manipulated from above through tiny holes drilled in the ceiling. The journalist scribbled notes furiously, his skepticism visibly crumbling before the onslaught of effects. When it ended, when Petrova collapsed in her chair claiming exhaustion and the lights were relit, the room erupted in amazed conversation. The Beaumonts wept openly, convinced they'd communicated with their daughter. The journalist approached Petrova with questions, already composing his article mentally. As Antoine packed his equipment, he discreetly retrieved the exposed plate from his camera obscura and slipped it into his jacket. He also managed to collect a sample of the wall's surface on one of his treated papers, which immediately showed a faint color change indicating phosphorus compounds. Marie-Claire appeared as they prepared to leave, ostensibly checking if they needed assistance. "Madame Beaumont has taken to her bed," she whispered.
The doctor says her heart is dangerously strained. These seances are killing her, just more slowly than the Sen killed Celeste. Outside, loading their equipment in the fog-shrouded courtyard, Lucien finally spoke. It was even more elaborate than last time. How did they— 3 projections layered, Antoine explained quietly. The phosphorescent base, the hidden limelight for movement, and our own light to blend them together. Plus acoustic tricks and physical manipulation. Probably cost them 20 francs in materials and preparation. And they'll earn hundreds from the Beaumonts. Antoine secured the last case, his mind already processing what he'd witnessed.
The evidence he'd gathered was damning, but as Inspector Fouché had warned, proving trickery was different from preventing belief. The Beaumonts wanted to be deceived, needed it, perhaps, more than they needed truth. "Master," Lucien said hesitantly, "my mother's medicine. I know you said we'd manage honestly, but if we exposed this publicly, perhaps Le Figaro would pay for the story?" Antoine considered this as their cart rolled through foggy streets where reality itself seemed negotiable. The journalist would indeed pay for such an exposé, but at what cost? The Beaumonts' public humiliation? Madame Beaumont's fragile health finally shattering? And there was still the threat against Lucien's mother to consider. Every light casts multiple shadows, he thought, and we must choose which ones to illuminate. The photograph from Antoine's camera obscura developed slowly in his makeshift darkroom, revealing through chemical processes what the eye had missed in darkness. November 11th brought sleet to Paris, and the workshop's windows rattled with each gust while Antoine studied the image, grainy but unmistakable. There, in the corner of the frame, was the thin man's hand operating the hidden projector, caught in the act of deception. "Someone's coming," Lucien called from the front room, his voice tight with the perpetual anxiety that had settled over him like dust. Marie-Claire entered, shaking water from her umbrella, followed unexpectedly by Father Guillaume. The old priest moved carefully on the wet floor, his presence immediately shifting the workshop's atmosphere from commercial to confessional. "I asked Father Guillaume to come," Marie-Claire explained, unwrapping a scarf from around her neck. "We need someone trustworthy to witness what I'm about to share." She produced a leather journal from her bag, its pages swollen with pressed insertions. "I found this in Madame Petrova's room. She's grown careless, believing the household entirely under her spell. It contains names, dates, amounts paid. The Beaumonts aren't her only victims in Paris." Antoine opened the journal carefully. The entries were in multiple languages, Russian, French, German, English, but the meaning was clear. A widow in Passy, 300 francs for contacting her late husband. A banker in Neuilly, 500 francs for investment advice from his deceased partner. The systematic exploitation of grief mapped out like a merchant's ledger. "There's more," Marie-Claire continued. "The accomplice inside the household, it's not who you'd expect." Before she could elaborate, the workshop door burst open. One of Petrova's associates stood there, not the thin man, but the other, broader, with scarred hands that spoke of violence as profession. "Monsieur Moreau."
"Madame Petrova requests your immediate presence. I'm rather occupied. This is not a request you can refuse." The man's coat shifted, revealing the handle of what might have been a knife or cudgel. "Your apprentice's mother had an unfortunate fall this morning. She's being tended to by a doctor, Madame Petrova's personal physician. Her continued care depends on your cooperation." Lucien made a sound like a wounded animal. Father Guillaume stepped forward, his aged frame suddenly seeming more substantial. "Threatening the sick is a grave sin, my son." The man laughed without humor. "Sin. Sin is a luxury I can't afford, Father. Monsieur Moreau, you have 5 minutes to decide." Antoine looked at Lucien's stricken face, at Marie-Claire's fury, at Father Guillaume's steady calm. The narrator observes that some traps are sprung not by stepping into them, but by refusing to move at all. "I'll come," he said quietly, "but my apprentice stays here. The boy comes too."
Insurance. The carriage ride passed in tense silence through streets where November commerce continued indifferent to their small drama. They stopped not at the Beaumont mansion, but at a townhouse near the Bois de Boulogne, elegant in that understated way that suggested real wealth rather than its performance. Madame Petrova received them in a study that might have belonged to a university professor. Books in multiple languages, scientific instruments, maps marked with colored pins. She'd abandoned her purple robes for a severe black dress that made her seem more formidable, not less. "Monsieur Moreau," she began in accented French that Antoine now suspected was deliberately exaggerated, "you've been investigating me. That photograph you took, yes, I know about your clever camera, could cause unnecessary complications. Your deceptions cause complications for grieving families." She laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. "Deception? I provide comfort." The Beaumonts sleep better, believing Celeste is at peace. The widow in Passy has stopped contemplating suicide. The banker makes confident decisions, believing his partner guides him. What do you provide with your honest illusions? Temporary distraction? I don't claim my projections are real spirits. No, you just let people pretend for an evening. I let them believe permanently. Which is kinder? She moved to a cabinet, withdrawing a photograph. Do you recognize this woman? Antoine's blood chilled. It was Marguerite, his late wife, taken perhaps a year before her death. She stood in the Luxembourg Gardens, smiling at something beyond the frame's edge. Consumption, wasn't it? Petrova continued conversationally. Such a slow, cruel death. Wouldn't you pay anything to speak with her again, to know she forgives you for not being there when she finally passed? How did you? I research my opponents as thoroughly as my clients. You were at a lantern exhibition in Rouen when she died. The neighbors found her 3 hours later. Each word was placed with surgical precision. Guilt is a powerful force, Monsieur Moreau. It makes us vulnerable to hope. Antoine's hands clenched, but he forced his voice to remain steady. My guilt is my own business. Everything is business eventually. She returned the photograph to its cabinet. Here is my proposition. Forget what you've learned. Continue providing your lighting services when requested, and your apprentice's mother receives the best medical care Paris can offer. Refuse, and, well, poverty and illness make such unfortunate companions. And if I expose you anyway, then the story becomes how a lanternist and his apprentice conspired to defraud grieving families, using their knowledge of projection to create false spirits. Who would believe otherwise? I have receipts for the chemicals your boy purchased. I have witnesses who saw you operating equipment during the seances. Your word against mine, and I have powerful friends. The logic was inescapable as a properly calculated optical equation. Antoine glanced at Lucien, who stood pale and trembling by the door. The boy's mother was hostage to their compliance, and they both knew it. "I need time to consider," Antoine said finally. "You have until tomorrow evening. There's another séance scheduled for November 15th, a special one. The Beaumonts wish to celebrate Celeste's birthday posthumously." The casual cruelty of this revelation hung in the air like incense. "You'll assist, of course." Back in the workshop, after confirming that Lucien's mother was indeed under care at a private clinic controlled by Petrova's associates, Antoine sat with Father Guillaume and Marie-Claire in the gathering dusk. "She's right about one thing," the priest said slowly. "The law would likely side with her." "But divine law won't heal Lucien's mother," Antoine interrupted. Then softer, "Forgive me, Father, I'm not myself." Marie-Claire had been silent throughout, but now she spoke with quiet intensity. "There's something I haven't told you. The accomplice inside the Beaumont household, it's not one of the servants. It's Monsieur Beaumont himself." The shock of this revelation rippled through the room. Antoine stared at her. "That's impossible. His grief is real." "But 3 days before the first séance, I saw him meeting with one of Petrova's associates. Money changed hands, a lot of it. He's paying for his own deception." She paused, letting this sink in. His wife was attempting suicide weekly. The false séances have given her reason to continue living. He's buying her sanity with conscious fraud. The narrator notes that truth, like light through a prism, reveals different colors depending on the angle of observation. What seemed like simple exploitation had become something far more complex. A conspiracy of desperation, where victim and perpetrator had merged into something indistinguishable. Antoine thought of his camera obscura, how it inverted images, making the world appear upside down until the mind corrected the perception. Perhaps this entire situation was similarly inverted, requiring a different kind of vision to understand properly. "If Beaumont is complicit," he said slowly, "then exposing the fraud would destroy not just Petrova, but him as well. His wife would learn that her husband facilitated her delusion. It would kill her," Marie-Claire said simply. "The betrayal would be worse than the original grief." Outside, sleet continued to fall, each impact on the windows like a small accusation. Antoine understood now why Petrova had seemed so confident. She wasn't running a simple fraud. She was managing a complex performance where some of the audience members were secretly part of the cast, all united in maintaining an illusion that had become more necessary than truth. Antoine woke on November 16th to the sound of glass breaking downstairs. Dawn hadn't yet reached Paris, and the workshop below his apartment lay in darkness, save for the intruder's lantern, its light moving through his carefully ordered space like a violation made visible. He descended the stairs quietly, a poker from his fireplace gripped in one hand, though he suspected he already knew what he would find. The vandalism was methodical this time, personal. Every glass slide Marguerite had painted lay shattered on the floor, the images she'd created with failing hands now reduced to colored splinters. His projection equipment remained untouched. They needed him functional for tonight's séance. But everything that mattered personally had been destroyed. The message was clear: compliance or complete destruction. Lucien arrived early, finding Antoine sweeping glass fragments into a dustpan with the careful movements of someone handling sacred relics. The apprentice's face showed he'd passed another sleepless night. His mother's condition had worsened, despite Petrova's promised medical care, or perhaps because of its deliberate inadequacy. "Master, I'm sorry. This is my fault. Stop." Antoine didn't look up from his sweeping. "Guilt is a luxury we can't afford. Help me salvage what we can." They worked in silence as Paris awakened around them, the sounds of commerce and conversation drifting through broken windows. Among the wreckage, Antoine found one slide miraculously intact, an abstract pattern of blues and greens that Marguerite had titled Evening's Approach. He held it to the growing light, watching colors shift like memory itself. Father Guillaume arrived at 9, bringing bread and news. "Petrova's been busy." 3 more families have engaged her services, all recently bereaved. She's building something larger than individual seances, almost a congregation of the grieving. The priest settled into the workshop's only unbroken chair, his presence bringing odd comfort to the violated space. "I've been thinking about your dilemma, my friend. Sometimes the greatest courage isn't in revealing truth, but in finding ways to make lies unnecessary." Before Antoine could ask what he meant, Marie-Claire appeared at the door, breathless from running.
"Inspector Fouché is at the Beaumont house. Someone sent him an anonymous letter about tonight's séance. Details about the phosphorescent paint, the hidden projectors, everything."
Antoine's mind raced. Who would have sent such information? Not him, not Lucienne, and Marie-Claire would have told him. Unless Beaumont himself?
That's what I suspect.
Perhaps he wants to end this, but can't do it directly without revealing his own involvement. She pulled a newspaper from her coat. But there's more. That journalist from Le Figaro published his article about the séance. He's proclaimed it genuine, calling Petrova a gift to grieving Paris. The article was worse than Antoine had imagined. Florid prose describing the miraculous manifestation, complete with illustrations that made Petrova look like a medieval saint. It would draw dozens more desperate families to her web, each willing to pay anything for false comfort. "We have to stop tonight's séance," Lucienne said suddenly. "My mother or not, this has gone too far." Antoine studied his apprentice. The boy had aged years in the past weeks, his easy ambition replaced by harder wisdom. "If we act directly, Petrova destroys us. But perhaps," he turned to Father Guillaume, "you said something about making lies unnecessary. What if we gave the Beaumonts something true to hold on to instead?" The priest's weathered face creased in a subtle smile. "Now you begin to understand." They spent the afternoon preparing, but not in the way Petrova expected. Antoine modified his projection equipment with particular care, installing the one surviving slide of Marguerite's work along with others he'd created that morning. Images of Celeste taken from newspaper illustrations, but transformed through artistic interpretation into something more honest than literal reproduction. At 4 o'clock, a message arrived. Lucien's mother had taken a severe turn. The private clinic would continue treatment only if Antoine appeared at tonight's séance as commanded. The threat was naked now, without pretense of negotiation. "Go to her," Antoine told Lucien. "Stay with her tonight. Whatever happens at the séance, you should be with your mother." The boy protested, but Antoine remained firm. Some performances required a smaller audience to achieve their full effect. As evening approached, he loaded his modified equipment with special care, each piece a component in what would either be his masterpiece or his ruin. The November streets were foggy again, as if the city itself conspired to obscure truth. Antoine traveled alone to the Beaumont mansion, his apparatus carefully secured in the cart beside him. He thought of Marguerite, of her final days when she could barely speak, but still managed to paint light itself onto glass. Perhaps that's what all art attempted, to capture light in its various forms, honest or deceptive. The mansion blazed again with futile brightness. Marie-Claire met him at the servants' entrance, her expression tense. "Inspector Fouché is here, ostensibly as a guest interested in spiritual matters. Beaumont looks sick with anxiety. And Petrova," she paused, "she seems different, sharper. Like she knows something's about to happen." Inside, Antoine found the music room transformed once more. But this time, alongside the usual seance preparations, someone had arranged photographs of Celeste around the room, her entire short life displayed like evidence in a court of memory. The effect was more unsettling than any phosphorescent trick. Petrova stood examining his equipment when he entered, her fingers running over the modified parts with knowing touch. "You've made alterations," she observed in her natural voice. The accent dropped entirely. "Minor adjustments for better light quality." She studied him with eyes that belonged in a laboratory, not a séance parlor. "You interest me, Monsieur Moreau. Most men would have either capitulated completely or fought openly by now. But you're planning something else, aren't you?" Before he could respond, Monsieur Beaumont approached, his face a map of conflicting emotions. "Monsieur Moreau," he said formally, then lower, "whatever happens tonight, please remember that I love my wife. Everything I've done has been for her." The narrator observes that love, like light, can blind as easily as illuminate. Antoine merely nodded, adjusting his equipment while guests began arriving. 20 people this time, including Inspector Fouché, whose presence created a subtle tension, like a discordant note in otherwise harmonious music. Madame Beaumont entered last, supported by her husband. She dressed entirely in white, as if for her own funeral or wedding. Perhaps she no longer distinguished between major transitions. Her eyes held the bright fragility of hope, stretched too thin, ready to snap at the slightest pressure. "Tonight," Petrova announced, abandoning her usual theatrical preamble, "we attempt something unprecedented. Not merely communication with dear Celeste, but a true photographic capture of her spirit. Monsieur Moreau's equipment will record what our eyes alone might miss." This was unexpected. Antoine hadn't agreed to any photographic element, yet Petrova smiled at him with the confidence of someone holding every card worth playing. She produced a photographic plate in a sealed holder. "You'll insert this into your camera at the crucial moment. The chemistry is specially prepared for capturing ethereal emanations." Antoine took the plate, understanding immediately. It was pre-exposed with an image of Celeste, probably taken from one of the room's photographs. When developed, it would seem to show the girl's spirit captured during the séance. Brilliant and irrefutable. Except he had different plans for that crucial moment. The séance began with unusual intensity. Perhaps it was Inspector Fouché's presence, or the accumulated desperation of weeks, but the room thrummed with genuine emotion that made the coming deception feel even more profane. Petrova began her invocations. The lights dimmed, hands joined in the familiar circle. But when the moment came for the manifestation, when Petrova coughed her signal, Antoine didn't activate his standard projection. Instead, he triggered the special mechanism he'd prepared, projecting not the expected dim circle, but Marguerite's surviving slide, that abstract pattern of blues and greens that seemed to pulse with actual life. The effect was unexpected, beautiful, and completely wrong for a seance. Gasps arose, not of recognition, but of confusion. In that moment of disruption, Antoine spoke into the darkness with quiet authority. This is what real art looks like, honest, crafted, admitting its own illusion while still providing beauty. The abstract patterns of Marguerite's slide continued dancing on the wall, while confusion rippled through the seance circle like disturbed water.
Antoine heard chairs scraping, someone calling for lights, but he maintained his projection with steady hands, even as his heart raced. This was the moment of greatest risk, not just to himself, but to everyone caught in Petrova's web of necessary lies.
"What is this?" Madame Beaumont's voice cracked with betrayal. "Where is Celeste?" Before Petrova could respond, Antoine switched slides with practiced speed. Now the wall showed one of his new creations, Celeste's image transformed through prismatic effects into something that was clearly artistic interpretation rather than attempted realism. Beautiful, honoring, but undeniably artificial. "This is what I do," Antoine said into the darkness, his voice carrying the authority of a craftsman discussing his trade. "I create beauty from light and glass. I don't summon spirits, I craft memories into visible form." Inspector Fouché struck a match, the small flame seeming brilliant after such darkness.
Perhaps we should have full illumination for this discussion. No! Petrova's command cut through the chaos, but too late. Someone had already turned the gas key, and light flooded the room, revealing the seance's machinery, not just Antoine's projector, but the hidden devices in the spirit batteries, the speaking tube poorly concealed behind curtains, and, most damningly, the phosphorescent paint still faintly glowing on the wall where previous manifestations had appeared. Madame Beaumont stood swaying, staring at the exposed deceptions with the expression of someone watching their world dissolve. Her husband reached for her, but she pulled away, her eyes moving between him and Petrova with growing comprehension.
"You knew,"
she whispered to her husband.
"the payments I found in your ledger, the meetings you said were about business."
Beaumont's face crumpled. "Isabelle, please, I only wanted—"
"You wanted me to be fooled."
"You paid her to fool me!" Her voice rose with each word until she was nearly screaming. "You turned our daughter's memory into a performance!" The narrator observes that truth, when it arrives after prolonged deception, carries the force of accumulated pressure suddenly released. Madame Beaumont collapsed into a chair. Not dramatically, as Petrova had done so many times, but with the genuine exhaustion of someone whose last support has been removed. Inspector Fouché moved toward Petrova with professional purpose, but she remained composed, even amused. "On what charge, Inspector? Providing theatrical entertainment? Monsieur Beaumont hired me to perform, and I performed. Where is the crime?" "Fraud, for one." "Prove it." Every payment was recorded as being for spiritual consultation and entertainment. I never guaranteed actual spirit communication. That would be impossible, wouldn't it? Her smile was sharp as broken glass. "Ask anyone here if I ever explicitly promised real ghosts rather than impressive effects." The legal truth of this was undeniable. Antoine had read enough contracts in his career to recognize careful wording when he heard it. Petrova had built her deception on foundation of technical truths, never quite crossing into actionable fraud. Marie-Claire stepped forward from where she'd been standing near the door.
There's something else everyone should know.
She looked directly at Madame Beaumont.
Your husband wasn't trying to deceive you from cruelty. 3 days before the first séance, I found you unconscious in your bath. You'd taken too much laudanum. It wasn't the first time.
The room fell silent except for Madame Beaumont's sharp intake of breath. Marie-Claire continued with gentle relentlessness.
Monsieur Beaumont was desperate. He thought if you believed Celeste was at peace, maybe you could find peace too.
It was wrong, but it came from love, not malice. Antoine watched this unfold while maintaining his position by the projector, ready to act if needed. But the moment for dramatic intervention had passed. Now came the harder work of sorting through emotional wreckage. Petrova began moving toward the door, but Inspector Fouché blocked her path. You may not be guilty of prosecutable fraud, madame, but I think we need to discuss your other clients. The widow in Passy, for instance, who recently discovered her séance was false and has filed a formal complaint. The medium's composure finally cracked slightly. I don't know what you mean. No? Then you won't mind accompanying me to the station to clear up these misunderstandings. Fouché's tone suggested this wasn't a request. He nodded to 2 uniformed officers who had apparently been waiting in the hallway. Your associates as well, I think. As Petrova was escorted out, she passed close to Antoine. You think you've won something here? Look at them, she gestured to the devastated Beaumonts. You've given them truth, but what will they do with it? Truth doesn't resurrect the dead or heal the living. It just removes the bandages from wounds that won't heal. Antoine wanted to respond, to defend his choice, but words seemed inadequate. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps comfortable lies were kinder than harsh truths. But he thought of Marguerite's paintings, honest in their beauty without claiming to be windows to another world, and knew he'd chosen correctly, even if the cost was high. The other guests dispersed quickly, uncomfortable with the raw emotion on display. The journalist from Le Figaro looked particularly disturbed, probably composing his retraction mentally. Only a few remained, the Beaumonts, Marie-Claire, Father Guillaume, who had arrived during the chaos, and Antoine himself. I should hate you, Madame Beaumont said to her husband, her voice empty of energy. But I'm too tired for hate.
I just want to understand why. Beaumont knelt beside her chair, his dignity abandoned. Because I couldn't watch you die by degrees. Because every morning I didn't know if I'd find you breathing. Because I thought false hope was better than no hope at all. Father Guillaume approached them slowly, his presence bringing a different kind of authority to the room. Perhaps, he said gently, this is where real healing can begin. Not with false spirits, but with honest grief, shared between 2 people who both loved the same child. Antoine began packing his equipment. Each piece returned to its case with mechanical precision. His hands shook slightly, reaction to the evening's tension finally arriving. Marie-Claire helped him carry the cases to the door, her touch on his arm briefly grounding him in simple human contact. What you did was brave, she said quietly. Also possibly foolish, but definitely brave. I destroyed their comfort. Petrova was right about that much. No, you revealed that their comfort was already destroyed, just hidden. There's a difference. She paused at the door. What will happen to your apprentice's mother now?
Antoine had been trying not to think about that. With Petrova arrested, her threats should be empty, but the private clinic might simply abandon their patient. I'll use the payment from tonight to get her proper care. Real doctors, not blackmail disguised as medicine. The November night was clear for once, stars visible above the gaslight. Antoine loaded his equipment onto the cart, movements automatic after years of practice. Behind him, through the mansion's windows, he could see the Beaumonts still talking with Father Guillaume, their silhouettes suggesting exhaustion but also, perhaps, the beginning of something more honest than what they'd had before.
Riding home through empty streets, Antoine thought about projection and reality, about the different ways light could reveal or conceal truth. His workshop would need repairs, his business would suffer from association with this scandal, and Lucien's mother still needed expensive care. But for the first time in weeks, he felt clean, as if he'd finally washed off some invisible contamination. At his workshop, he found Lucien waiting, despite his earlier dismissal. "My mother's stable," the apprentice reported. "The hospital accepted her once I explained the clinic was fraudulent. And Master?" He held out a small package. "I found these at the morning market. The vendor didn't know what they were." Inside were 3 of Marguerite's slides, ones that must have been sold by mistake years ago. They showed simple scenes, a garden at sunset, birds in flight, a child playing with a hoop, but painted with such skill that they seemed to glow with internal light even without projection. Antoine held them carefully, feeling something ease in his chest that had been tight since the vandalism. Not everything was lost. Not everything could be destroyed by those who confused truth with cruelty or kindness with deception. The last days of November brought early snow to Paris, transforming the city into something softer than its usual harsh edges suggested possible. Antoine stood in his repaired workshop, testing the alignment of a new projection lens, while Lucien read aloud from the morning papers. 2 weeks had passed since the séance's explosive conclusion, and the scandal still rippled through Parisian society like waves from a dropped stone. "Madame Petrova has fled to Switzerland," Lucien reported, though several of her associates remain in custody. "The prosecutor says charges are unlikely to hold. Too many powerful people were willingly complicit in their own deception." Antoine adjusted the lens minutely, watching light refract through its surface. Strange how something so simple as curved glass could bend reality, make the distance seem near, the small appear large. "What of the Beaumonts?" "Nothing in the papers for 3 days now. Marie-Claire sent word that they've retired to their country estate." Lucien set down the newspaper, his expression troubled. "Master, do you think we did the right thing?" Before Antoine could answer, the workshop bell rang. Father Guillaume entered, shaking snow from his coat, followed unexpectedly by Inspector Fouché. The 2 men made an odd pair, the priest with his gentle authority and the inspector with his professional skepticism, yet they seemed comfortable in each other's company. "We've come with a proposition," Father Guillaume announced, settling into the chair they'd finally replaced after the vandalism. "Inspector Fouché has been thinking about the problem of fraudulent mediums." The inspector pulled out his pipe, then remembered he was indoors and reluctantly returned it to his pocket. "After the Petrova affair, we've discovered at least a dozen similar operations in Paris alone.
The bereaved are particularly vulnerable to such exploitation. Yet as we've seen, the law is nearly powerless when victims want to be deceived. You want me to help expose them? Antoine couldn't hide his weariness at the prospect. Inspector, I'm a lanternist, not a detective. No, Father Guillaume interjected. We're proposing something different. What if instead of exposing false seances after they happen, we offered an alternative? Honest commemorations using your projection techniques, beautiful, meaningful, but clearly artistic rather than supernatural. Fouché nodded. Memorial services that acknowledge their memorials, not communications. The priest provides spiritual comfort. You provide visual beauty, and I ensure no one claims it's more than it is. Antoine considered this while cleaning his equipment with practiced movements. The idea had merit, using his craft to help grieving families without deception. But would people accept honest artifice when dishonest promises were so readily available? "There's someone here to see you," Lucien announced from the doorway. Behind him stood Monsieur Beaumont, aged 10 years in 2 weeks, his expensive coat hanging loose on a frame diminished by grief and revelation. The room tensed as Beaumont entered. Inspector Fouché's hand moved instinctively toward where his truncheon would hang, though this was clearly not an official visit. Father Guillaume rose respectfully, but Beaumont waved him back down. "I've come to thank you," Beaumont said to Antoine, his voice rough as unpolished stone, "and to apologize, and to ask a favor. My wife would have come herself, but she's fragile still." Antoine set down his cleaning cloth, giving the man his full attention. "How is Madame Beaumont?" "Recovering, slowly. The doctors say the shock was severe, but perhaps necessary." Like resetting a broken bone, painful, but required for proper healing. Beaumont pulled an envelope from his coat. "This is the rest of what I would have paid Petrova for continued seances. I want you to have it. I can't accept payment for destroying your peace." "You didn't destroy our peace. You revealed its absence. There's a difference." Beaumont placed the envelope on the workbench with deliberate finality. "The favor I ask is this. Could you create a projection show about Celeste? Not a seance, not a false manifestation, but something beautiful that celebrates who she actually was." The narrator observes that grief, like light, takes many forms, sometimes harsh and revealing, sometimes soft and comforting. Antoine looked at the envelope, knowing it contained enough to secure Lucien's mother's care for months, perhaps enough to expand his workshop, certainly enough to matter. "I would need photographs, stories about her life, details that make her more than just an image," Antoine said carefully. "My wife has been writing memories in a journal since the truth came out. She says it helps to record real memories instead of manufactured ones. And we have many photographs from her short life." Beaumont's voice caught slightly. 11 years wasn't enough, but it was real. That should count for something." Father Guillaume spoke gently. "Perhaps we could combine efforts. A memorial service at the church with Monsieur Moreau's projections. Something that honors the dead without claiming to raise them." Over the next weeks, they developed this new form of commemoration. Antoine worked with unusual care, creating slides that told Celeste's story through images, not attempting to show her as she was, but interpreting her life through color and light. He incorporated photographs but transformed them, making clear these were artistic representations, not attempts at resurrection. The service was held on December 15th at Sainte Marie, Father Guillaume's small church. The Beaumonts sat in the front pew, surrounded by friends who'd attended the false seances, but now came for something more honest. Antoine had positioned his equipment carefully, projecting onto white cloth hung where stained glass windows cast their own colored light during day services. The projection began with abstract patterns, blues and greens like water, for Celeste had loved swimming before the Seine claimed her. Then photographs transformed through prismatic effects, showing her at different ages, but clearly presented as memories, not manifestations. Antoine had incorporated some of Marguerite's techniques, learned from studying her surviving slides, creating depth through layering that made flat images seem dimensional without claiming they were real. Marie-Claire attended, sitting near the back but watching intently. She'd left the Beaumont employ. The household held too many difficult associations, but had found position with a family that appreciated her intelligence along with her service. After the ceremony, she approached Antoine as he packed his equipment. "That was beautiful," she said simply. "Honest and beautiful. Celeste would have liked it, I think." "You knew her well?" "Well enough to know she was a real child. Not the perfect angel everyone's made her into since her death. She could be stubborn, mischievous, sometimes cruel in the way children are, but also kind, curious, full of life." Marie-Claire helped him fold the projection screen. "That's what made her loss terrible, not losing perfection, but losing possibility." Madame Beaumont approached them, moving carefully, as if still learning to walk without the crutch of false hope. "Monsieur Moreau, thank you. This was difficult but necessary." "Like cleaning a wound before it can heal properly." She handed him something, a small daguerreotype in a silver frame. "Celeste made this in art class, just weeks before the accident. She was trying to capture light itself," she said. "Perhaps you understand what she meant better than most." The image was abstract, accidental, the result of a child's experiment with photographic chemicals and sunlight. But it was beautiful in its imperfection, honest in its attempt to capture something ephemeral. Antoine accepted it carefully, understanding the trust being offered. Inspector Fouché appeared as Antoine loaded his equipment into a hired carriage. "3 other families have inquired about similar services," he reported. "Word spreads when something genuine is offered in place of fraud." "You may have started something important here." As the carriage rolled through December streets, where snow muffled the usual city sounds, Antoine reflected on the strange journey from October's invitation to December's resolution. He'd lost some innocence about human nature, gained some wisdom about the complexity of truth and kindness. Lucien sat beside him, no longer the eager boy who'd started this season, but a young man who'd learned that ambition without ethics led nowhere worth going. "Master," Lucien said as they neared the workshop, "I've been thinking about what Petrova said, about truth not healing wounds. She was wrong, wasn't she?" Antoine considered his response carefully. Truth doesn't heal wounds, but it allows them to heal properly instead of festering beneath pretty bandages. Sometimes that's the best we can offer. January's cold gripped Paris with fingers of ice, and Antoine Moreau sat in his workshop on the 18th day of 1874, sorting through correspondence that had accumulated like snow against a doorway. 6 weeks had passed since Celeste Beaumont's memorial service, and his unusual combination of artistry and honesty had drawn unexpected attention. Letters requesting his services arrived daily, some from the bereaved seeking truthful commemoration, others from institutions wanting educational projections, and one particularly intriguing commission from the Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle. Lucien entered carrying tea and fresh bread from the bakery next door, his mother now recovered enough to complain about his cooking, a sure sign of returning health. The apprentice had matured remarkably through autumn's trials, his ambition tempered by experience into something more sustainable than mere hunger for success.
A letter came by special messenger, Lucien said, producing an envelope of quality paper sealed with black wax, from the Beaumonts. Antoine opened it carefully. Inside, Madame Beaumont's careful script invited him to visit their country estate, not for a séance or memorial, but for what she called a conversation about light and shadow, truth and comfort. The narrator observes that some invitations carry the weight of conclusion, offering closure to stories that might otherwise trail off into uncertainty. Antoine decided to accept, partly from curiosity, but mostly from a sense of unfinished business with the family whose tragedy had initiated his own journey through deception and revelation. The journey to the Beaumont estate took him through countryside transformed by winter into something pristine and peaceful. The mansion itself, smaller than their Paris residence, but somehow more genuine, sat among gardens now dormant but promising future growth. Marie-Claire met him at the door, surprising since she'd left their employ.
"I'm visiting," she explained, leading him through the hallways lined with family portraits, including several of Celeste at various ages. "Madame Beaumont asked me to come for the week. She says I understand things others don't." The Beaumonts received him in a conservatory where winter light fell through glass panels onto forced bulbs just beginning to bloom, amaryllis and paper whites defying the season. Madame Beaumont looked healthier than she had in months, though marked by her experiences like metal shaped by fire. Her husband stood beside her with the protective stance of someone who'd learned the cost of both truth and lies. "Thank you for coming," Madame Beaumont began, gesturing for Antoine to sit. "We wanted to tell you something important. We're establishing a fund, the Celeste Beaumont Foundation, to provide honest memorial services for families who've lost children."
No séance, no false promises, just beautiful commemorations like what you created for us. Antoine set down his teacup carefully, surprised by this development. "That's remarkably generous. It's necessary," Monsieur Beaumont said firmly. "We learned that grief makes people vulnerable to those who would exploit hope. If we can offer an alternative, truth presented beautifully rather than lies dressed as miracles, perhaps others won't fall into the trap we did." They discussed practical details, funding for projection equipment, training for operators who understood both the technical and emotional aspects of the work, partnerships with churches and secular institutions alike. But beneath the logistics ran a deeper current of philosophy about the nature of memory and commemoration. "I've been thinking about light," Madame Beaumont said unexpectedly, moving to stand by the windows where afternoon sun cast long shadows across the floor. "How it reveals and conceals simultaneously, how shadows can't exist without it." Celeste understood that intuitively. That daguerreotype she made was her attempt to capture light itself, not objects illuminated by it. Antoine thought of Marguerite's paintings, those attempts to fix beauty in glass and chemical that would outlast the hands that created them. "My late wife felt similarly. She said projection was the closest humans could come to painting with light itself." "Tell me about her," Madame Beaumont said gently.
if you're comfortable sharing. So Antoine found himself speaking about Marguerite, not the sanitized version he usually offered, but the complex truth. Her talent that exceeded his own, her frustration with limitations placed on women artists, her determination to continue creating even as consumption stole her breath. How he'd been away when she died, pursuing a commission he'd thought important, but now couldn't even remember clearly.
Guilt is its own kind of ghost, Father Guillaume said, having arrived while Antoine spoke. The priest settled into a chair with the ease of someone welcome in this space. It haunts us more persistently than any spirit a medium might conjure. But perhaps, Marie-Claire suggested from her corner where she'd been quietly listening, that's why honest commemoration matters. It acknowledges the dead were real people, not perfect spirits. They had flaws, made mistakes, left things unfinished, just like those of us still living. The conversation continued as afternoon faded into evening, touching on philosophy and practicality, memory and hope. They discussed the other families who'd been deceived by Petrova, most still clinging to their illusions despite exposure of her methods. Truth, they agreed, couldn't be forced on those who preferred comfortable lies, but it could be offered as an alternative for those ready to accept it. As Antoine prepared to leave, Monsieur Beaumont walked him to his carriage through gardens, where snow covered dormant plants waiting for spring's resurrection, the real kind, slow and natural, not the instant manifestations promised by fraudulent mediums. "I need to apologize properly," Beaumont said when they were alone. "I hired you under false pretenses, involved you in deception without your knowledge. It was wrong, regardless of my intentions." Antoine considered this man who'd paid for his own deception to save his wife's sanity, who'd risked everything when that deception became too dangerous to maintain. "We all cast shadows, monsieur. The important thing is recognizing when we're blocking someone else's light." Returning to Paris through winter darkness, punctuated by occasional inn lights, Antoine reflected on the strange symmetry of his journey. It had begun with an invitation to provide false illumination, and ended with a commission to offer genuine light. Between those points lay Lucien's desperate betrayal and redemption, Marie-Claire's quiet courage, Father Guillaume's patient wisdom, and the Beaumonts' transformation from victims to benefactors. His workshop looked different when he returned, not physically, though Lucien had reorganized some equipment for better efficiency. Rather, it felt like a space with purpose beyond mere commerce. The shelves of slides, the projection apparatus, the chemicals and tools, all instruments for creating honest beauty in a world too often satisfied with beautiful lies. Lucien had left a note saying his mother was well enough to return home tomorrow, along with a new slide he'd painted himself, his first real artistic attempt rather than mere technical reproduction. It showed the workshop interior, but transformed through perspective and color into something almost magical, while remaining recognizably real. Antoine held the slide to the lamplight, admiring his apprentice's developing skill. Soon Lucien would be ready to establish his own workshop, not from premature ambition, but from genuine readiness. The boy had learned that craft without ethics was mere trickery, that true mastery required understanding, not just how to create effects, but when and why they should be created. Outside, January wind rattled the windows, and somewhere in Paris, other families grieved losses that seances couldn't truly address. But tomorrow, Antoine would continue his work, projecting light into darkness not to summon false spirits,
but to celebrate real memories. It wasn't much against the weight of human sorrow, but it was honest, and sometimes honesty was its own form of comfort. He climbed the stairs to his apartment, joints protesting the cold, and prepared for sleep.
On his bedside table sat 3 items. Marguerite's surviving slides, now joined by several others recovered from various shops. The daguerreotype Celeste had made in her attempt to capture light, and the letter from the museum commissioning educational projections about natural phenomena. Life continued, the narrator observes, neither tragedy nor comedy, but something more complex. A projection of multiple images overlapping, creating depth through their interaction. Antoine had learned that truth and beauty weren't opposites, but could be woven together, like light through a prism, separated into components that remained part of a greater whole. As sleep approached, he thought about tomorrow's work, next week's presentations, next month's training of new projectionists for the Beaumont Foundation. The future spread before him not as bright promise nor dark threat, but as a series of moments requiring illumination, each casting its own particular shadows, each offering opportunities for honest light. We are all lanternists, he thought drowsily, projecting our inner light onto the world's screen, creating shadows and illumination in equal measure. The only choice is whether we acknowledge the machinery or pretend it's magic. The workshop below settled into nighttime quiet, equipment resting until tomorrow's resurrections, not of the dead, but of memory transformed into art, sorrow transformed into beauty, lies transformed into truth, gentle enough to bear.